She didn't marry my son for love, my mother-in-law said, lifting her champagne glass just high enough for everyone in the backyard to notice. She married him for money. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It spread in quiet ripples, in sideways glances and raised eyebrows, in the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I stood there beside the long oak table Daniel had set up for the party, the late afternoon sun warm against my shoulders, the smell of grilled steak still hanging in the air. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. That maybe I had misunderstood the tone, the intention. But then I saw the way she looked at me. Not confused. Not joking. Certain. And worse, satisfied. I felt every eye shift toward me, waiting. Waiting for me to react, to defend myself, to prove her wrong. My fingers tightened slightly around the stem of my glass, but my face didn't change. I smiled. Not because I found anything amusing, but because I refused to give her what she wanted. Across the table, Daniel stood frozen. His jaw tightened, his gaze flickering between me and his mother, but he didn't say a word. Not a single word. That silence landed harder than anything she had just said. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else took a sip of their drink a little too quickly. The music from the small speaker in the corner kept playing, absurdly cheerful, like it belonged to a different afternoon entirely. "Oh, don't look so serious," Evelyn added lightly, waving her hand as if she could smooth it over. "We're all family here. We should be honest with each other." Honest. The word echoed in my mind, hollow and sharp at the same time. I had spent the past 5 years building a life with Daniel, standing beside him through long work nights, helping him rebuild after his father passed, learning every tradition his family held onto like it was sacred. I had never asked for anything that wasn't mine. And yet, in a single sentence, she had reduced me to something transactional. Replaceable. I took a slow breath, letting it settle in my chest before I spoke. But then I didn't. Because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a careless comment that slipped out. This was deliberate. Planned. A performance, carefully delivered in front of an audience that mattered. And if I reacted now, if I argued, if I raised my voice, if I tried to explain, I would only become exactly what she wanted me to be. Emotional. Defensive. Guilty-looking. So I did the only thing she didn't expect. I lifted my glass slightly, met her eyes, and said nothing. The conversation around us slowly restarted, awkward at first, then more confident as people chose their sides without saying it out loud. A few drifted closer to Evelyn. A few avoided me entirely. Daniel finally stepped toward me, his voice low. "Sophie, what is she talking about?" Not she's wrong. Not ignore her. Just a question. Careful. Measured. Like he was already unsure of the answer. I looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside me went still. "I don't know," I said quietly. And that was the truth. Because whatever game had just begun, I hadn't seen it coming. But I understood one thing with absolute clarity. She hadn't just tried to humiliate me. She had planted something. A seed of doubt. And in a family like this, doubt didn't stay small for long. Daniel did not bring it up again that evening, not directly. He stayed close enough to me to look like a husband, but not close enough to feel like one. I could sense it in the small things, the way his hand hovered near my back but never quite touched me, the way his eyes drifted back to his mother whenever she laughed a little too loudly across the yard. By the time the sun dipped below the trees and the string lights flickered on, the party had found its rhythm again, but I had not. Conversations softened when I walked past. People smiled a second too late. Someone who used to hug me simply nodded from a distance. It was subtle, almost polite, but unmistakable. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it. I excused myself earlier than planned, claiming a headache, and no one tried to stop me. Not even Daniel. The drive home was quiet. The city lights blurred past the windshield, and the hum of the tires against the road filled the space where conversation should have been. Daniel kept both hands on the wheel, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. I waited. Not because I did not have anything to say, but because I wanted to hear what he would choose first. He did not choose me. Mom would not say something like that without a reason, he finally said, his voice calm, almost careful, as if he were discussing a business decision instead of his wife. I turned my head slowly, studying his profile in the dim light. So you believe her? I asked. He exhaled, long and controlled. I am saying there has to be something we are missing. We. The word felt distant. Detached. As if we were no longer standing on the same side of anything. I looked back out the window, watching the reflection of passing headlights streak across the glass. 5 years. That was how long it took for doubt to replace certainty. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine but did not move. For a moment, neither of us did. Then he said, maybe we should take a closer look at things. Finances. Accounts. Just to clear everything up. Clear everything up. As if my integrity were a document that needed reviewing. I nodded once, slowly. If that is what you need, I said. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same. The same framed photos on the wall. The same faint scent of lavender from the diffuser in the corner. The same kitchen counter where I had stood countless evenings waiting for him to come home. But it felt different now. Quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Daniel went upstairs without another word, and I remained in the kitchen, standing still, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards above me as he moved around. I did not cry. Not because it did not hurt, but because something else had taken its place. Something colder. More precise. I walked to the counter and picked up my phone, scrolling through recent notifications, emails, transaction alerts I had ignored before because I trusted the life we had built. One notification caught my attention. A transfer I did not remember making. Small enough to be overlooked. Large enough to matter. I stared at it for a long moment, my reflection faintly visible in the dark screen. Then I opened the banking app. Another transfer. Different date. Same pattern. My name attached to movements I had never authorized. My fingers hovered for a second before I tapped into the details, my heartbeat steady, almost too steady. This was not confusion. This was not a misunderstanding. And suddenly, Evelyn's voice from earlier that evening sounded different in my mind. Not cruel. Not impulsive. Certain. I set the phone down gently on the counter and let out a slow breath. If she believed what she said, then someone had made sure she would. And if Daniel was already questioning me, then whatever had been planted had taken root faster than I expected. I reached for the edge of the counter, grounding myself in its solid weight, and allowed the silence of the house to settle around me. I did not feel panicked. I did not feel overwhelmed. I felt focused. Because this was no longer about a comment at a party. This was something else entirely. Something deliberate. And whoever had started it had underestimated one thing. I was not going to defend myself. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not because I had to, but because my mind had already started working long before my eyes opened. The house was still. Quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, as if something had shifted overnight and even the walls had noticed. I moved through the kitchen slowly, making coffee the same way I always did, measuring each scoop, pouring the water with steady hands. Routine had always grounded me. This morning, it sharpened me. My phone sat on the counter where I had left it, the screen dark, but I already knew what I would find when I picked it up again. I opened the banking app and went back through the last 6 months. Then the last year. Patterns began to form, small at first, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Transfers spaced just far enough apart to avoid attention. Amounts that did not trigger alerts. Accounts that should not have been linked to mine at all. My name was there on every record. Clean. Official. Convincing. If I had not been looking for it, I might have believed it too. I set my coffee down untouched. This was not random. It was careful. Designed. Someone had built this story piece by piece, and last night was simply the moment they chose to reveal it. I heard footsteps upstairs, slow and deliberate, and a moment later Daniel entered the kitchen. He looked at me, but not fully. Not the way he used to. "You are up early," he said, reaching for a glass. "I could not sleep," I replied. That was the only honest answer I was willing to give him. He nodded, as if that explained everything, and leaned against the counter across from me. There was a distance between us now that no amount of space could measure. "I have a meeting this morning," he said. "We will talk tonight. About everything." Everything. The word lingered in the air, undefined and heavy. I watched him for a moment, taking in the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided direct eye contact. He was already preparing himself. Not to understand me, but to question me. "Of course," I said. He left shortly after, the front door closing with a soft click that echoed longer than it should have. I stood there for a while, listening to the silence settle again, then I picked up my phone and scrolled back to the transaction details. There was one account number that appeared more often than the others. Repeated. Consistent. Familiar in a way I could not immediately place. I copied it down on a notepad, along with the dates and amounts, my handwriting precise and controlled. Then I did something I had not done in a long time. I opened the shared documents folder Daniel and I had used for years. Tax records. Investment summaries. Property files. Everything organized, everything transparent. Or at least, that was what I had always believed. I searched for the account number. It appeared almost instantly. Listed under a secondary holding account. Authorized access, Daniel Carter. My hand paused above the screen, completely still. I read it again. Slowly. Carefully. There was no mistake. No misunderstanding. The account connected to the transfers, the ones made under my name, was tied directly to him. For a moment, I felt nothing. No anger. No shock. Just a quiet, steady realization settling into place. The pieces aligned too cleanly to ignore. Evelyn's certainty. Daniel's doubt. The transactions. It was all connected. I closed the file and placed my phone back on the counter, my reflection staring back at me from the dark glass. This was no longer about clearing my name. This was about understanding how far it went. And more importantly, why. I reached for my coffee, now cold, and took a small sip anyway. The bitterness lingered, sharp and grounding. I did not need answers right away. I needed clarity. And clarity required patience. If they believed I would panic, they were wrong. If they thought I would confront them without proof, they were wrong about that too. I set the cup down gently and straightened my posture, my mind already moving ahead of the moment. Whatever story they had written for me, I was going to read every line of it. And then, when the time was right, I would decide how it ended. I did not call Daniel that day. I did not send a message or ask a single question. Instead, I spent the afternoon going back through everything I thought I understood about our life together. Not the big moments. Those were easy to remember and even easier to believe. I focused on the small ones. The details that used to feel insignificant. The things I had trusted without thinking twice. I opened old emails, scrolling through years of conversations, looking for anything that felt out of place now that I knew what to look for. At first, there was nothing. Just ordinary exchanges. Grocery lists. Dinner plans. Reminders about appointments. But then I started noticing gaps. Missing attachments. References to documents I had never seen. Small financial discussions that ended abruptly or shifted tone without explanation. It was subtle. Carefully done. The kind of inconsistency you would only catch if you were no longer assuming honesty. I moved to the filing cabinet in the study, the one we both used but that Daniel managed more often. I pulled out folders one by one, laying them across the desk in neat rows. Property records. Insurance policies. Investment summaries. Everything appeared complete at a glance. Organized. Professional. Reassuring. But reassurance meant nothing to me anymore. I checked signatures. Dates. Authorization lines. And then I saw it. A document I did not remember signing. My name was there, clean and precise, matching every other signature I had ever written. But the date was wrong. I knew where I had been that day. I remembered it clearly because it had been my sister's birthday, and we had spent the entire afternoon together across town. There was no way I had signed anything here. I stared at the page for a long moment, my eyes tracing each letter of my name as if it might rearrange itself into the truth if I looked long enough. It did not. I placed the document aside carefully and reached for my phone again. This time, I did not hesitate. I called the bank directly, navigating through the automated system with quiet patience until a representative answered. My voice remained steady as I asked about the account linked to my name, about authorization records, about any in-person verification tied to the transactions. The answers came back calm and professional, but each one confirmed what I already suspected. The account had been opened online. Verified through shared credentials. No physical presence required. No additional confirmation requested. It was all legitimate. On paper. I thanked the representative and ended the call, placing the phone face down on the desk. For a few seconds, I closed my eyes. Not to escape, but to think. This was not a mistake. It was not an accident or a misunderstanding that could be explained away with a conversation. This had been constructed. Layered carefully over time until it looked undeniable. And it had worked. Daniel believed it. Evelyn believed it. And anyone else who looked at those records would believe it too. I stood up slowly, gathering the documents into a single stack, aligning the edges with deliberate care. My movements were calm, controlled, almost methodical. Because panic would not help me. Emotion would not change anything. Only precision would. I walked back into the kitchen, setting the papers down beside my untouched coffee, and looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Every surface. Every object. Every detail of the life I thought I had built. It all felt intact. And yet, beneath it, something had been quietly rewritten without me knowing. I rested my hands lightly on the counter, grounding myself again in something solid, something real. Then I exhaled slowly and allowed the next thought to settle in, clear and undeniable. If Daniel was connected to this, then I could not confront him yet. And if Evelyn had used this to turn him against me, then she believed she had already won. That belief would be my advantage. I picked up the stack of papers and placed them back into the cabinet exactly where I had found them, leaving no sign that anything had been disturbed. Then I wiped the counter clean, erased the traces of my morning, and returned everything to its place. By the time the clock on the wall ticked past 3 in the afternoon, the house looked exactly as it had the day before. Quiet. Orderly. Unchanged. But I was not the same person standing inside it anymore. I had seen enough to understand the shape of what I was dealing with. And I knew now that whatever came next would not be decided in a single conversation. It would unfold slowly. Carefully. On my terms. Daniel came home later than usual that night. I heard his car pull into the driveway just after 8, the headlights briefly washing across the living room wall before disappearing. I was already sitting on the couch, a book open in my lap that I had not actually read a single page of. When he walked in, he paused for a moment as if assessing the room, as if trying to measure something that had changed but could not yet name it. "You are still up," he said, setting his keys down by the door. "I said we would talk," I replied, closing the book gently and placing it on the table beside me. He nodded, loosening his tie, moving slowly like someone preparing for a conversation he did not want but felt obligated to have. He sat across from me, not beside me, leaving a deliberate space between us that felt wider than the room itself. "I went through some of the accounts today," he began, his tone controlled, professional. "There are inconsistencies, Sophie. Transfers that do not align with what we discussed. Accounts I did not know you had access to." I watched him carefully, noting every word, every pause. He was not accusing me outright. Not yet. But the framework was already there. The assumption beneath the questions. "I saw them too," I said calmly. That made him hesitate. Just for a second. "You did?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "And I found something else." I let the silence stretch just enough to hold his attention, but not enough to reveal anything I was not ready to say. His posture shifted slightly, leaning forward, interest mixing with caution. "What do you mean?" he asked. I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "I mean that whatever is happening is more complicated than it looks." It was the truth. Just not the whole truth. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Sophie, this is serious. My mother would not bring something like that up in front of everyone unless she was sure." There it was again. Not my name. Not our marriage. His mother. His certainty was not built on evidence. It was built on trust in the wrong place. "And you are sure?" I asked quietly. He did not answer immediately. His gaze dropped to the floor for a brief moment before returning to me. "I am trying to understand," he said. Trying. The word felt like a compromise he had already made with himself. I nodded once, as if that was enough. "Then take your time," I said. "Look at everything. Every detail. Do not stop until you are completely sure." My voice did not waver. Not even slightly. That seemed to unsettle him more than anything else I could have said. He frowned, studying me as if he expected to find cracks, hesitation, something that would confirm what he already suspected. But I gave him nothing. Because I had learned something important in the last 24 hours. The truth does not need urgency. Only lies do. "We should review everything together," he said after a moment, softer now, almost cautious. "Maybe tomorrow." I tilted my head slightly, considering him, then nodded. "Tomorrow is fine." He stood up shortly after, the conversation unfinished but somehow concluded in his mind. As he walked past me toward the stairs, he hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, as if he wanted to say something else. He did not. The sound of his footsteps faded upstairs, leaving the house quiet once again. I remained where I was, my hands resting lightly in my lap, my posture relaxed, composed. From the outside, nothing had changed. A calm conversation. A mutual agreement. A plan to review the facts. But beneath that surface, something had shifted entirely. He believed he was getting closer to the truth. He believed that time would reveal it. And in a way, he was right. I just knew something he did not. The truth was already there. Waiting. And when he finally saw it, it would not be the version he had been prepared for. The next morning, I did not wait for Daniel to come to me. I let him believe that he was leading the process, that he was the one uncovering something important. That illusion mattered more than anything I could say. He was already sitting at the dining table when I walked in, his laptop open, documents spread neatly beside him. The sunlight coming through the window cast long shadows across the table, dividing the space between us in a way that felt almost symbolic. "I started reviewing the statements," he said without looking up. "There is more than I expected." I poured myself a cup of coffee, moving at an unhurried pace, giving him the time to settle into his role. "What did you find?" I asked, taking a seat across from him. He turned the laptop slightly so I could see the screen, highlighting a series of transactions I already knew by heart. "These transfers," he said. "They are consistent. Intentional. This is not random." I studied the screen, nodding slowly as if I were seeing it for the first time. "No, it is not," I replied. That answer seemed to satisfy him, at least on the surface. He leaned back slightly, watching me now, measuring my reaction. "Do you recognize any of these accounts?" he asked. I paused, just long enough to feel real, then shook my head. "No," I said. It was not entirely a lie. I recognized them now, but not from my own actions. He exhaled, rubbing his temple, the tension in his posture becoming more visible. "Sophie, I need you to be honest with me," he said, his voice lower now, more personal, but still edged with doubt. "If something happened, if there is something I do not know, this is the time to say it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a brief moment I saw the man I had married. The one who used to trust me without hesitation. The one who would have defended me without needing proof. That version of him felt distant now, replaced by someone cautious, uncertain, influenced. "I am being honest," I said quietly. And I was. Just not in the way he expected. He held my gaze for a second longer, searching, then finally looked away. That was the moment I knew. He had already made space for doubt. And once doubt settles in, it does not leave easily. We spent the next hour going through documents together, line by line, transaction by transaction. I asked questions when necessary. I let him explain things I already understood. I allowed him to feel in control of the process, to believe that each step was bringing him closer to clarity. But what I was really doing was watching. Not the numbers. Not the accounts. Him. The way he reacted to certain entries. The slight hesitation when specific account numbers appeared. The almost imperceptible shift in his posture when the name linked to the secondary account came into view. He did not notice that I noticed. And that was exactly what I needed. At one point, he leaned forward, his voice tightening slightly. "This account," he said. "It is linked to our shared credentials. That means whoever accessed it had full authorization." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes," I said. "It does." He sat back again, silent now, his mind working through implications he was not yet ready to say out loud. I could see it in his eyes. The conflict. The hesitation. The possibility he was trying not to consider. I let the silence sit between us, heavy but controlled. Because this was the turning point. Not when the truth would be revealed, but when it would begin to surface in his own mind. And that mattered more than anything I could force upon him. Eventually, he closed the laptop, the soft click echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I need more time," he said. "This is more complicated than I thought." I folded my hands in my lap, my posture relaxed, composed. "Take all the time you need," I replied. And I meant it. Because time was no longer working against me. It was working for me. As he gathered the documents and stood up, I remained seated, watching him move through the room with a sense of urgency he had not felt the day before. He believed he was getting closer. That he was unraveling something hidden. And he was. Just not in the way he imagined. I reached for my coffee, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip, letting the quiet settle back into the space he left behind. Then I placed the cup down gently and allowed a single, steady thought to form. He was starting to see it. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough. And once a person begins to question their own certainty, everything else begins to shift. 2 days later, Daniel asked me to come with him to his mother's house. He did not frame it as a request. He said it like a step that needed to happen, like the next logical move in something he was still trying to control. "She wants to talk," he said that morning, standing near the doorway with his phone in his hand. I looked at him for a moment, measuring the tone, the weight behind those words. "About what?" I asked. He hesitated, just slightly. "About everything," he replied. The same word again. Undefined. Convenient. I nodded once, calm, as if this was expected. "All right," I said. The drive to Evelyn's house felt longer than usual, even though it was the same 20 minutes it had always been. Daniel kept his focus on the road, his grip on the steering wheel tighter than necessary. He did not turn on the radio. He did not try to fill the silence. And I did not help him. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed her car already there, along with another one I recognized from previous family gatherings. She had made sure this would not be private. Of course she had. Inside, the house looked exactly as it always did. Immaculate. Controlled. Every detail in place. Evelyn stood in the living room, waiting. She did not smile when she saw me. She did not greet me. She simply looked at me with that same certainty she had worn at the party, as if nothing had changed, as if everything had already been decided. "You came," she said, her voice even, measured. "You asked," I replied. Daniel stepped between us slightly, not enough to protect, just enough to manage the space. "Mom, we need to go through this carefully," he said. "There are things that do not add up." She glanced at him briefly, then back at me. "There is nothing complicated about it," she said. "The records are clear." Clear. I let the words sit for a second before I spoke. "Records can be created," I said quietly. That was the first time I had pushed back. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Just enough. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Daniel looked at me, surprised. Evelyn's expression did not change, but something in her eyes tightened. "Are you suggesting something?" she asked. "I am saying that what looks obvious is not always true," I replied. My voice remained steady, controlled, giving her nothing she could use against me. She took a step forward, her posture straight, confident. "Then explain the transactions," she said. "Explain why your name is on every one of them." Daniel's attention snapped back to me, waiting. This was the moment she had been building toward. The same setup as the party, just in a smaller room, with fewer witnesses, but higher stakes. I could feel it. The expectation. The pressure to respond, to defend, to justify. I did none of those things. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a single printed document on the table between us. Not everything. Just one piece. The account authorization record. The one that connected the transactions to shared credentials. Daniel's name. I did not push it toward them. I simply set it down and let it exist there. Daniel leaned forward first, picking it up, his eyes scanning the page quickly, then again more slowly. I watched the shift happen in real time. The tightening of his jaw. The slight change in his breathing. Evelyn did not move. Not yet. "Where did you get this?" Daniel asked, his voice lower now, sharper. "From the same place you did," I replied. That was all I said. No accusation. No explanation. Just enough to let the truth begin forming in his own mind. Evelyn finally stepped closer, her gaze flicking to the paper in his hand, then back to me. For the first time since this began, there was something new in her expression. Not doubt. Not fear. But calculation. She had not expected this. Not like this. The room fell quiet, heavier than before, as if the air itself had changed direction. Daniel looked up at her, then back at the document, then at me. "This account," he said slowly, "it is linked to me." The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth, like he was still testing them for truth. I did not respond. I did not need to. Because the shift had already begun. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. And once something begins to unravel, it does not stop on its own. Daniel did not speak for a long time after that. He kept his eyes on the paper, reading it again and again as if the words might change if he looked hard enough. The silence stretched across the room, thick and uncomfortable, pressing in from all sides. I remained still, my hands resting calmly at my sides, my attention not on the document but on him. Because this was no longer about proof. The proof was already there. This was about realization. "This does not make sense," he said finally, his voice quieter than before, stripped of the certainty he had carried into the room. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor, controlled, deliberate. "Of course it makes sense," she replied smoothly. "You must have overlooked something. These systems can be confusing if you are not careful." Her tone was calm, but there was a tightness beneath it now, something restrained, something that had not been there before. Daniel did not look at her immediately. That, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. "No," he said slowly, his eyes still fixed on the page. "This account is under my authorization. Not hers." The word hers hung in the air between us, heavier than it should have been. Evelyn's expression did not break, but it shifted. Just slightly. "Enough. That does not prove anything," she said. "Access can be shared. You know that." He looked up then, directly at her, and for the first time since this began, there was something in his gaze that had not been there before. Doubt. Not toward me. Toward her. "Did you know about this account?" he asked. It was a simple question. Direct. Unavoidable. Evelyn paused. Just for a fraction of a second. But in a room like this, in a moment like this, that fraction was everything. "I know what I have seen," she said carefully. Not an answer. A redirection. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That is not what I asked," he said. The shift was complete now. Not loud. Not dramatic. But undeniable. The control she had held so easily before was no longer absolute. I watched her closely, noting the way her posture remained upright, her composure intact, but her responses more measured, more cautious. She was recalculating. Adjusting. Trying to regain ground she had not expected to lose. "I brought this up because I was concerned," she said, her voice softening slightly, taking on a different tone now, one that suggested reason, care, responsibility. "I wanted to protect this family." Protect. The word landed flat. Daniel looked back down at the document, then slowly placed it on the table. "From what?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. And this time, the silence did not work in her favor. It worked against her. Because now, every pause carried weight. Every hesitation became visible. I remained where I was, silent, composed, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. This was never about forcing the truth into the open. It was about creating the space where it could not stay hidden. Evelyn's gaze shifted to me briefly, sharp, assessing, as if trying to measure how much I knew, how far I was willing to go. I gave her nothing. No expression. No reaction. Just stillness. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. "There are still unanswered questions," she said finally, redirecting again, trying to pull the conversation back into uncertainty. "This is not resolved." Daniel nodded slowly, but not in agreement. "In thought. In processing." No, he said. It is not. He looked at me then, his expression no longer guarded in the same way. Not fully open. Not yet. But different. We need to look deeper, he added. I held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Yes, I said. That was all. No explanation. No defense. Because the balance had already shifted. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough to change the direction of everything that would come next. Evelyn took a small step back, her composure still intact, but the certainty that once defined her now edged with something else. Something quieter. Something less stable. And in that subtle shift, I saw it clearly. The beginning of the end of her control. 3 months later, I saw her again. Not at a party. Not in a room filled with quiet judgment and careful smiles. But at my front door. It was a Tuesday morning, just past 9. The air was cool, the kind that still carried the last trace of winter before spring fully settled in. I had just finished making coffee when the doorbell rang. I did not rush to answer it. I never did anymore. When I opened the door, she was standing there. Evelyn. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. But in the way she held herself. The sharp certainty that used to define her posture had softened, replaced by something uncertain. Something fragile. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt different this time. Not tense. Not heavy. Just clear. Sophie, she said finally, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. Not weak. Just stripped of everything unnecessary. I stepped aside slightly, not inviting, not refusing. She hesitated before walking in, her eyes briefly scanning the space as if she were stepping into unfamiliar territory. The same house she had visited many times before now felt different to her. I could see it. We sat in the living room, across from each other, just like before. But nothing about this moment resembled the one at her house. This time, there was no audience. No performance. No control. She clasped her hands together, her fingers tightening and loosening as if she were searching for the right place to begin. I was wrong, she said. The words came out slowly, carefully, as if each one required effort. I did not respond. I simply watched her. Because I had learned that silence reveals more than questions ever could. She swallowed, her gaze dropping briefly before returning to mine. I thought I understood what was happening, she continued. I believed I was protecting my son. Protecting this family. The same justification. But this time, it sounded different. Not like a defense. Like a realization that had come too late. I should have looked deeper, she added. I should have asked more questions. Yes. She should have. But she had not. And that mattered. The room remained quiet, the ticking of the clock on the wall marking each passing second with quiet precision. Then, slowly, she stood up. I did not move. I did not interrupt. I simply watched as she took a single step forward. And then another. Until she was standing directly in front of me. For a brief moment, she hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw everything she had lost. Control. Certainty. Position. And then, without another word, she lowered herself down. Onto her knees. The movement was careful, deliberate, unmistakable. I felt the moment settle around us, heavy but not overwhelming. Final. I am asking you to forgive me, she said, her voice steady despite everything. I was wrong about you. I looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the full weight of what she was offering. Not just words. Not just regret. But a complete reversal of everything she had built her certainty on. And for a moment, I said nothing. Because this was not the kind of moment that required an immediate response. Forgiveness is not a reaction. It is a decision. And decisions like that are not made under pressure. They are made with clarity. I stood up slowly, stepping around her without urgency, without hesitation. She remained where she was, waiting. I walked toward the window, letting the light fall across my face, grounding myself in something steady, something real. Then I turned back to her. Some things cannot be undone, I said quietly. My voice was calm. Not cold. Not harsh. Just clear. She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of that truth. I understand, she replied. And for the first time since I had known her, I believed that she did. I did not tell her to stand. I did not offer comfort. Because this was not about punishment. And it was not about revenge. It was about consequence. And some consequences remain, even after the truth is revealed. I walked to the door and opened it, stepping aside once more. Not as an invitation. As an ending. She rose slowly, her movements careful, and walked past me without another word. When the door closed behind her, the house returned to its quiet stillness. But it felt different now. Not because something had been fixed. But because something had been seen. Clearly. Completely. And that was enough.